I told myself I wasn't a lawman anymore. I kept the tin star in my coat pocket to prove it, not pinned to my chest where a man wears the things he stands behind, but folded in a scrap of oilcloth at the bottom of my pocket, carried the way you carry a stone you can't make yourself put down. That star was still in my pocket, untouched, the night I put spurs to my horse and rode hard through the dark toward the orange glow already rising over Cedar Fork's main street. The horse covered the last half mile at a dead run, hooves throwing up clods of dry earth behind us, my hat brim snapping back against the wind, the smell of torch smoke reaching me before the sound of the crowd did. I could hear them before I could see them clearly.
Hollis!
40 voices layered into one low, dangerous roar, the particular sound a peaceful town makes in the hour it decides to stop being one. I hauled up hard at the edge of the light, my horse's flanks heaving, and swung down out of the saddle already moving toward the jailhouse before my boots had fully settled in the dust. A woman's voice from 2 nights before was still sitting somewhere behind my ribs, telling me all she needed was one man willing to stand in a doorway. I'd ridden into Cedar Fork 3 weeks earlier looking for nothing in particular, which had become my particular skill since I turned in my deputy star in a town 400 miles east and swore off carrying a badge for anybody, including myself. Cedar Fork was a cattle town built on open range that wasn't open anymore, not since Emmett Draycott had spent the better part of a decade quietly fencing off water and grass that had never legally been his to fence. Barbed wire had come cheap and plentiful to the territory by then, and men like Draycott had learned fast that a fence built quietly on a slow Tuesday raised fewer questions than one built loud on a Saturday when the whole town was watching. Abigail Renshaw taught school in the room behind the church, 28 years old, sharp-eyed and plain-spoken, the kind of quiet, striking beauty that unsettled men who expected schoolteachers to be soft and unremarkable. Her brother Thomas ran a homestead claim on the North Creek, 160 acres proved up under the Homestead Act 5 years back, sitting square in the middle of range Draycott had been trying to buy him off for 2 years running. Thomas had refused every offer. That refusal was the whole reason for what was happening in the street ahead of me now. A land surveyor named Whitfield had turned up dead in the creek bed 2 days before, shot once, his satchel of survey papers missing, papers that documented exactly how many acres of public range Draycott had fenced illegally over the years. By the time I heard about it, Thomas Renshaw was sitting in the Cedar Fork jail on the word of a single witness, and the town had spent 3 days deciding, without benefit of trial, that he'd done it. Draycott didn't have to hate Thomas Renshaw to want him hanged before that satchel surfaced. He just needed the noise of one death to bury the truth of another. Abby had found me at the saloon 2 nights before, sitting alone with a drink I hadn't touched. "I'm told you were a lawman once," she said. "I'm told you don't work for Draycott. My brother didn't kill that surveyor, and there's a crowd forming that doesn't much care what's true." I'd asked what she wanted from me. "I'm not asking you to be a lawman again," she'd said. "I'm asking you to stand in a doorway for 1 night, that's all." I hadn't answered her then. I'd sat with it 2 hours, turning the star over in my pocket, telling myself a man who'd already been wrong once with a gun in his hand had no business volunteering to be right the second time, reasoning that held up right until I heard the first shouting start. There'd been a moment before she left the saloon that I hadn't planned on. She'd stood to go, and I'd stood too out of old habit, and for a second neither of us moved toward the door. "You said you'd been a lawman once," I said. "Not why you stopped asking men like me instead of the sheriff you've actually got." I'd started to ask her something else entirely, why she'd trusted a stranger 3 weeks in town over a man she'd known her whole life, and gotten as far as opening my mouth before the saloon door banged open and a ranch hand hollered something about torches at the mercantile. Whatever I'd been about to ask dissolved into the scramble of men reaching for hats and coats. She was gone before I'd found the words again, and I carried that unfinished question with me all the way to the jailhouse door. I'd kept to myself those 3 weeks the way I'd learned to keep to myself since Millbrook, since the night I was deputized to help serve a warrant and shot a man in the dark who turned out to be unarmed, turned out to be exactly who he said he was. His name was Peterson. He'd been fixing a porch step at midnight because his wife had turned her ankle on it that afternoon, and he hadn't wanted her to turn it again in the morning. And in the dark, with a warrant for a horse thief in my pocket and a nervous informant's claim that the thief was hiding at that exact address, A man with a hammer in his hand looked enough like a man with a weapon that I didn't wait long enough to be sure. The coroner called it a reasonable mistake under the circumstances. I called it the last time I'd ever pin a badge to my chest, and I still saw Peterson's face some nights, the particular confusion on it in the half-second before everything happened. The crowd outside the jail numbered somewhere past 40 by the time I reined in, torchlight throwing long orange shapes across the street, the heat of 40 torches together warm enough to feel from 20 yards off. Sheriff Purdy stood on the porch with his hands raised in a gesture that wasn't quite refusal and wasn't quite permission. I dismounted, walked through the crowd's edge without drawing my gun, boots steady in the dust, and climbed the porch steps to stand in the jailhouse doorway with my back to the door and my hands loose at my sides, deliberately visible, deliberately empty. "This isn't your fight, stranger," a big man near the front called out. Coy Barnes, one of Draycott's foremen. A rope coiled over one shoulder in the particular casual way a man carries a thing he wants seen without having to say what it's for. "Wasn't planning on making it one," I said. "Just don't plan on moving." "There's 40 of us and one of you," Barnes said, stepping close enough that torchlight caught the sweat on his face despite the cold night air. "Man in there killed Whitfield. Whole town knows it." "Whole town's heard it said a lot of times tonight," I said. "Doesn't make it evidence." I kept my hands loose, deliberately away from the gun on my hip, because a man reaching for a weapon in a crowd like that one was a man giving 40 others permission to reach for theirs too. You want to hang somebody without a trial, you'll go through me first, and that's a worse night for everybody than waiting on the sheriff to do his job. A bottle shattered against the porch post a foot from my head, glass scattering across the boards. I didn't flinch. A long, uncertain silence followed, the crowd's energy hanging in that suspended moment where a mob decides whether it's going to become something worse or start, slowly, to lose its nerve. Before I go on, I want to step outside the story for just a moment. If you're driving right now, or sitting somewhere quiet tonight, thank you for spending part of your evening in Cedar Fork with me. If this story has found a place in you, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like and hit subscribe before you go. Now, back to that jailhouse door, because the night is far from over. The standoff held the better part of an hour, Barnes and his loudest men working themselves up in waves, me saying almost nothing, Purdy edging further from the whole business with every passing minute. It was Abby who broke the deadlock, slipping away sometime after the shouting started and returning with Doc Pruitt by the sleeve, the town's aging physician, a man everyone trusted precisely because he'd never once taken a side in 30 years of practice. Doc examined the body, Abby announced, loud enough to carry over the crowd's noise. "Tell them what you told me, Doctor." Pruitt cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the attention but unwilling to lie for anyone. "Whitfield was shot close range with a heavy caliber revolver," he said. "Thomas Renshaw owns a .22 rifle for coyotes and no handgun I've ever known him to carry in 5 years." A murmur moved through the crowd, not enough to send them home, but enough to slow the momentum, which was worth more in that moment than any speech could have been. "Doesn't prove he didn't borrow one," Barnes shouted back, though the certainty had gone out of his voice, replaced by something closer to a man arguing to save face than conviction. I used the lull to say the only thing I'd planned to say all night. Whoever shot Whitfield took his survey satchel too. A man doesn't steal paperwork in a fit of temper. That's a man covering something the papers would have shown. I let that sit in the torchlight a moment. Ask yourselves who benefits from a dead surveyor and missing evidence more than a man arguing with him the evening before. I didn't say Draycott's name, I didn't have to. Enough of Cedar Fork had watched that fence line creep onto public range to do the arithmetic themselves. The crowd thinned slowly, Barnes and his loudest holdouts drifting off first, until the street stood empty except for guttering torchlight and the three of us on the porch, me, Abby, and a sheriff who looked 10 years older than he had at sundown. "That satchel's still missing," Abby said quietly. "Whoever has it still has every reason to keep it missing." We sat on the jailhouse steps a while, the adrenaline draining out of both of us in the cold air. "You never answered what I asked at the saloon," she said. "Why you stopped taking a badge." "Man died because I was careless with a warrant," I said, the first time I'd said it plain to anyone in 2 years. Wasn't looking to be careless again. "You weren't careless tonight," she said. 4 hours in a doorway against 40 men with torches, and you never drew your gun once. We found the satchel's trail before dawn. Abby remembered Whitfield had stopped at the telegraph office the afternoon he died, agitated and in a hurry, sending word east about his findings before anyone could stop him. We woke the telegraph operator, a nervous young man who at first claimed client confidentiality until Abby pointed out plainly that a dead client had considerably less need of confidentiality than a living town had of the truth. He still had the message copied in his logbook, standard practice for the office's own records. It named the acreage, named Draycott plain as anything, described in the clipped, factual language of a man who'd expected to still be alive to testify to it himself. It was enough, wired to the Territorial Land Office at first light, to bring a federal surveyor out from Cheyenne within the week, and enough to give Purdy the spine to ride out to the Draycott Ranch and ask Wesley Draycott, the rancher's own son, where he'd been the night Whitfield died. I rode out with him, not as a deputy, I still hadn't pinned the star back on, but because Purdy asked plainly if I would, and I found I didn't have the same reasons to refuse that I'd been carrying around for 2 years. Emmett Draycott met us at his own gate that morning, silver-haired and thick-shouldered in a fine leather vest that still looked worked rather than new, his ice-blue eyes giving nothing away even as Purdy explained why we'd come. He didn't try to stop us from questioning his son. Men like Draycott rarely fought battles they could see themselves losing in front of witnesses. They simply waited to see how much the losing would actually cost them. Wesley confessed within the hour, the way men who've spent their lives protected by their father's money often do the moment that protection is finally, actually questioned. He was younger than I'd expected, 22 maybe, and the confession came out of him less like a criminal's calculation and more like a boy relieved to finally set something down he'd been carrying badly. He'd argued with Whitfield over the survey findings, panicked when the surveyor wouldn't hand over his satchel, and fired a single shot he'd spent 3 days telling himself wasn't really his doing. Emmett Draycott hired the best lawyer money could buy, and spent a year trying to make the matter disappear into appeals, the way rich men in that territory generally could when the law moved as slow as it did out there. But the fence lines came down regardless, surveyed and corrected by federal order, and Cedar Fork's open range opened back up for the first time in a decade. Thomas Renshaw walked out of that jail cell 3 days later into weather turning warm with early spring, and the first thing he did, before he even embraced his sister, was shake my hand for a long moment without saying anything at all, which struck me as about the right amount of words for what there was to say. It was Abby who found me afterward, sitting again at that saloon table, the tin star still in my pocket, never once pinned on, never once needed as anything but a promise I'd kept simply by standing in a doorway without it. The saloon smelled the same as it always did, tobacco and spilled whiskey, and the faint mineral tang of the territory's hard water, ordinary smells that felt strange to notice again now that the crisis had passed. "You never wore it," she said, sitting down across from me, setting her hat on the table between us. "Not even once, the whole night." "Didn't need to," I said. "Wasn't the badge that mattered, was just standing there." "Purdy's resigning," she said. "Tan's going to need a new sheriff before summer. Man who stood in that doorway without a badge might make folks feel considerably safer than one who's only ever worn it." I turned the star over once, feeling the same old weight, except something in it had shifted, not lighter, but carried differently, the way a stone feels different once you've set it down on purpose instead of dragging it out of habit. "I've been wrong with a badge on before," I said. "Man died because of it. Good man. Better than most." "You were right last night without one," she said. "Maybe the badge was never really what made you careless, Caleb. Maybe you were just a young man in the dark with bad information, same as any lawman anywhere could have been." I looked at her a long moment, and for the first time in 2 years, pinning that star back on didn't feel like tempting the same mistake twice. It felt like choosing to stand in the daylight the same way I'd stood in that doorway. "Thomas is going to want to thank you properly," I said, "once he's had a night's sleep that isn't in a jail cell." "He can thank you," she said. "I already got what I wanted. I got my brother back and a schoolhouse full of children who'll have a town worth growing up in." She paused, something softer crossing her face than the sharp practicality she'd led with all week. "Though I wouldn't mind if you stayed around Cedar Fork a while longer either, Caleb Hollis, just so you know." I pinned the star to my coat the following morning, in front of the mercantile where 40 men had gathered with torches only 3 nights before, the same dirt street now quiet under ordinary daylight, and Abby Renshaw stood beside me when I did it, and neither of us said very much, because there wasn't much left that needed saying. Cedar Fork got its new sheriff before summer came in. The fences came down, mile after mile of wire pulled up and hauled off by men who'd spent 2 years afraid to touch it. The range opened back up, green and unbroken clear to the tree line, and a schoolteacher and the man who once stood in her brother's doorway found, in the quiet months after, that some things worth carrying are only heavy until you decide to carry them on purpose. Thank you for sitting with me a while by this story tonight. Wherever you're listening from, I'm grateful you stayed. Until the next story finds you.